Hi there, I'm Sean C. Davis, and this is a tutorial on dynamically generating JSON pages from Markdown files in a Gatsby project. For this example, we're going to use, we'll use the typical post example. We'll create a couple posts as Markdown files, and then we'll take a look at how we can query them through Gatsby's GraphQL mechanism, and then we'll take the results of that query and we'll write them to JSON files. So to get started, let's go ahead and create our post files. I like to put Markdown file content in source/content, and because these are posts, I'm going to segment them by posts, and I'll just do some silly examples. My first post .md, and what we'll do here is we'll open the file by starting with front matter to add some attributes to this particular post. So we'll give it a title, and how about we give it a date, let's say. And then maybe a little bit of body copy. Okay, and well, let's build a solution for more than one post. So let's duplicate that and create another one. Just call it my second post because we're super creative with our naming. Okay, so we'll change a couple things just so we see that this is different. All right, now the first thing I want to be able to do after I have this content is to be able to query it through GraphQL in Gatsby. And we can do that with the help of a super useful plugin called Gatsby Transformer Remark. That plugin sits on top of and works really closely with the Gatsby file system plugin as well. And I'll kind of show you real quickly how they work together and also separately. But I'm working here, as you can see on the right side of the screen, with the Gatsby default starter. And in that starter kit, it comes with the file system source plugin anyways. So all we have to do, if you're working with the default starter or you already have the file system plugin ready to go, is install the Transformer Remark plugin. So I'm going to say npm install, and it'll be Gatsby Transformer Remark, and we will let that get installed. And while that's going, one thing I'll say here is that the big gotcha with this particular approach in generating JSON pages is that it's not going to hook into the Gatsby development process. It's all going to occur after the Gatsby project has been built. We're going to take this content and we'll parse it and then shove it into JSON files. So the caveat here is we're not going to be able to work with the development server. We're going to end up running the build server, but we will use the development server in a minute here so we can look at how to query this data. Okay, so now that I've got that plugin installed, I'm going to come over here to the Gatsby config file. And notice that in this default starter, they're already using Gatsby source file system, and that's to grab files from the source images directory. And we can duplicate this. You can use the file system plugin as many times as you want. You just have to point it to the directory that matters to you. This one we'll call posts, and we'll point it to where we just created our post, which is in source content posts. And then we also have to add our Transformer Remark plugin, which we can do directly. We don't need any special config here. All right, so let's save that, and then let's start up our development server. Okay, so now my development server is running, and you notice that these messages that are output at the bottom in the terminal say that the development server is available at localhost 8000, which is what I'm showing up here in the browser, but that we can get to graphical, which is how you can interact with the content through GraphQL queries. If we just go to /__ GraphQL, or graphical. All right, so I'm going to get rid of all these comments, and let's just look at what the source file system plugin does real quick, so we can see how the Transformer Remark plugin works. The source file system plugin offers these queries called all file, and if we run those, let's look at maybe relative path. We'll notice that it is looking in source content posts and source images, and what it brings us back is 4 different files. The 2 are the 2 we just created, and the 2 Markdown files in the source content posts directory. The other 2 came with the default starter template. They're images that were presumably in source images. If we can look real quick, and yep, there they are. So what the Gatsby Transformer Remark plugin does is it sits on top of all file, or it sits on top of the file system plugin. And whenever a file is created, or a node file is created, so and what I mean by that is if I run or add type name here, notice that each of these nodes that are returned are all considered file nodes. And what that Transformer Remark plugin is doing is looking for file nodes to be created that are also Markdown files. And then it creates additional nodes on top of them with some fields. It parses the front matter and it converts the Markdown text into HTML. And so those nodes then become available through the all Markdown Remark query. So if I do this, notice now that I only have 2 records being returned to me. And if I do a type name, I now get Markdown Remark. And I don't have all of the fields available to me that were available on the file node, but I can say something like file absolute path, which will tell me exactly the route to where these 2 particular files are. And it does some other magical stuff. So anything that we put in front matter at the top of the file is going to be available in a front matter object. So now I can say front matter, and inside here I can say title and date, and I should see both of those values. Notice there was some magic that happened with the date formatting. So if I wanted to control the format, I could say format string, and maybe we just want to do month, day, year, and there we go. Now I've got a little more control over the date. And then lastly, we want the content, the body content from that post, but we don't want it as Markdown. We want it as converted HTML. Well, we can use the HTML field here, run that, and look, this is all of the data that we're going to use. And so what we'll output in the JSON files ultimately is this title, date, we'll call HTML body, and then file absolute path. What we want to do is we want to just steal that file name portion of it and consider that the slug of the post. And so what we'll do is we'll write the file to public /posts/myfirstpost.json, which is where we'll be able to retrieve it when we've built the project and are running it in production. Okay, so now we know the query that we need to run to be able to get this content. Let's actually start writing JSON files. To do that, we're going to come over here to the Gatsby node file. Now, Gatsby offers a number of node APIs. These are essentially lifecycle hooks, places where we can hook into the build process within Gatsby and kind of manipulate whatever we want, really. And that's a lot of the power of Gatsby comes in that ability to interject code anywhere throughout that build process. In this particular case, we want almost everything to already be done, and then grab the content, run this query, convert it, transform the data into objects that we can build as JSON, and then write those to JSON files. If that was a lot, don't worry about it. We'll step through it. The first thing I want to do is show you how you can hook into that build process and return the data. So to do that, let's start by saying exports.onPostBuild. So onPostBuild is that node API from Gatsby that will give us the ability to, that will run after the build has been completed. So this is going to be a function, and we're going to make it an asynchronous function. And the reason for that is because we're going to use GraphQL, and GraphQL returns a promise, but we want to make sure that promise is resolved before Gatsby thinks that this function has been completed. Otherwise, the build will finish, and this function will never, it will start running, but it won't ever finish. Okay, so there are plenty of arguments available to us here, but the only one we really need is GraphQL. So we'll come in here, and what we'll do is we'll say await. So we wait for this promise to be resolved. This is where we hit up GraphQL, and then inside of here is this is our query value. So we're going to come back and we'll copy what this query was, run it in here. And then because this is a promise, we can say .then, and I'll call the resulting data result. And then for starters, let's just log out what we've got. Okay. Now, like I said, we can't really do anything with the development server. This is running on onPostBuild. And so I'm going to kill my development server here, and then let's run a build. Okay, that build completed, and look at what we got back. We got back an object, and it has a data key, which is another object, an all markdown remark key, and then edges is an array. And we know from our query structure that edges is an array, and it's an array of objects that have one key, which is node. So we want to make this, you know what, let me stop there. One kind of cool trick I like to do is I like to alias my queries, because I feel like it's a little more semantic to work with the results. I know that these are going to be posts. They're the only markdown files that I have at this moment. So I'm going to say posts. And now if I run this build again, let's watch what happens. Okay, look at this. Now I have data, but instead of all markdown remark, now I have posts. So it's not something we necessarily have to do here, but in many projects, you're going to have multiple different types of markdown files. And so you might want to alias those individual queries. So one thing we could do, I'll note this, I'm not going to actually write it in here because all we're doing is working with posts, but you could pass a filter into all markdown remark. Let's say you have posts and you have pages and you have users or whatever you have, how you've maybe segmented various markdown file types. If you wanted to query specifically just items within one directory, you can do that through a GraphQL filter. We're not going to worry about that right now. We're going to keep moving. Okay, so now that we've got all the data we need, now we just need to transform it so it's in a usable format and then write it to those JSON files. First, let's set some shared reference. So we'll say post path is going to be public posts. And that means what we want to do is in the public directory, we want to see a posts directory, and then we want to write our JSON files in there. And that's so that when we view this or access this project in production, we could go to /posts/slug.json and be returned the value and the data for that particular post. We'll run an example at the end to show you what's going on here. All right, the next thing I like to do is I like to take all of this structure and compact it so it's just an array of objects that represent each of these nodes. It's a little bit cleaner for me to work with. So I say posts is going to equal result.data.post.edges and then map to set individually. These are nodes. Okay, the next thing we want to do is we want to make sure that the public post directory actually exists. And so to do that, we're going to take advantage of a node library for the file system, which is called FS. So we'll say require FS. And then down here, we're going to say if our directory doesn't exist. So if fs.exists, and we're going to run exists sync, which means that we're running synchronously because, again, we want to make sure that we have resolved and finished doing everything that we're going to do in this particular process, in this function, so that the Gatsby build doesn't finish before we're done doing everything we need to do. So if that post path doesn't exist, then again, we're going to call fs and we're going to say, well, then let's create it. And again, it's sync. So it's make the directory, but make it synchronously. Oh, post path. Okay, And now let's stop and look at where we are. So at this point, I'm going to log out posts, which should be just an array of objects with these values, keys and their corresponding values. And we should also see a post directory within the public directory. So save that file. Let's go ahead and run that build again. Give it a second and see what happens. Okay, first let's look at the build output. Notice we have an array this time, and that each item in the array is an object. And yep, we've got front matter, title, date, HTML, and file absolute path. Perfect. And then I come over here to my public directory and notice that I now have a post directory. There's nothing in it, but I've got it, and I can start adding files to it. Okay, so next let's loop through all of our posts, transform that data, and then write those files. I keep saying that. Now let's actually do it. We have everything in place. All right, post.map, and map is a method on arrays in JavaScript that will essentially pretty quickly loop through all of the items. So in this case, it's just these two Markdown files and their corresponding data. All right, so we're going to call the object. So basically this object here will be represented by the post variable. All right, so in here, the first thing I want to do is I want to generate the slug, because we don't have the slug anywhere other than the file name. To do that, we're going to make use of another node library. This one is called path. And so we're going to say our slug is path.basename, and basename takes a whole file path and it pulls just the last segment out of it. So if you looked at these crazy long file paths that we have to the file, when I call path.basename, it's going to give me just my first post.md and my second post.md. So in here, say path.basename, and then we'll pass it the actual absolute path. So file.absolute path. Now this by itself gives us my first post.md, my second post.md. We don't want the .md because we want to replace that with .json. So this basename function gives us the ability to pass a second argument there, which is the extension. And if that extension exists, notice that it is removed from the result. It says optionally an extension to remove from the result. And we can get that using another path method, which is called extension name. And again, passing the file absolute path. So that's a lot, but it's a nice, easy, abstracted way to grab the file name without the extension. So there's our slug. And then next, let's format the data for each post. So we'll start by saying post.frontMatter. Now this, if you haven't seen this before, it looks a little out of place in JavaScript. It's called a spread operator. And what this does is it is essentially the equivalent of writing post.frontMatter.title and post.date.title. That would mean every time I add something new to the front matter in one of these files, I then have to add a key here, which I would have to do anyway so I can get the result back, but I would also then have to add it down here. In this case, I just do this spread operator for post.frontMatter and it automatically shoves title and date in there. But I want to be a little bit more explicit with the body and slug because well, for the slug, we've generated it here. So we'll pass that as a new attribute. And then for body, we could do this one of two ways. I could say body is HTML. I guess that's the way we have to do it. But if you wanted to be more semantic and match those properties up, you could also do this. I said that should be post.html. But in this case, if you used body as an alias, you could call it post.body as well. Let's just go ahead and keep it to HTML so it matches what the Markdown Remark plugin is doing for us. Okay, so here's our transformed data. This is what we ultimately want to write to the file. To do the writing, we can, again, make use of the file system node library. So we'll call write file sync, again, working synchronously. So the first argument here is going to be the path, so the path to that file. We'll use these backticks to so we can make use of string interpolation. So we'll say post path, which will be public/posts, and then slash the slug, which doesn't have an extension, remember, so it'll be just my first post, my second post, and then .json. And then our second argument here is going to be the actual data, which is this data object, but we can't pass an object to it. Otherwise we'll get the string representation, or the just the name representation of it. We want the actual full string. So we'll use the JSON class for that. So JSON and the stringify method, and then we'll pass data to that, which will give us the data object, but as a full string. And really, that should be it. That should be everything we need. So I'm going to run the build again, but what I'll do is run npm run clean first. And what that's going to do is it's going to delete my cache in my public directory. I like doing that when I'm testing this kind of stuff locally, because it wipes out everything. So it shows me what a clean build would look like on in production. It also mimics what say a new developer coming to the project would see as well. Okay, so that went pretty quickly. We can look at public. Now I have posts, and look, I've got my two files in it. I've got my first post, and it's got what I'd expect to see, and my second post. Perfect. So to represent how you might use this in production, I can then run npm run serve, which will take what I've built in the public directory and serve it at localhost 9,000 instead of 8,000. So let's pull that up, and notice, here we go. I've got my Gatsby default starter again, but now I'm going to go to posts and my first post.json, and look at that. I see it. I can do my second post.json. So that's it. I mean, there's a lot you can do from here. This is kind of just the foundation that you can build from to take local Markdown files and generate dynamic JSON pages from them, make them part of your build. Well, that's it. I'm Sean C. Davis. Hope you got something you could use out of this, and I will see you next time.